So just take us through the levels of business confidence in Queensland at the moment. Where does it sit historically?
The latest survey of business conditions has indicated that there's been a fairly serious reduction in business confidence. We know, however, pleasingly, that business performance during the March quarter held up fairly steadily. Total sales revenue was solid, employment was solid, and indeed expectations for the June quarter are fairly steady as well. But it was sobering to see the reduction in business confidence for the Queensland economy over the next 12 months. Now, we know that that is a function of many influences. The transformation that the resources sector is currently experiencing, together with low consumer confidence across Australia, coupled together with drought conditions throughout Queensland, and also the fact that the federal government hasn't been able to action many of its federal budget initiatives, and we're only literally days away from the next federal budget, they have all weighed heavily on the minds of business. But the elephant in the room in respect to the survey and why business confidence has fallen was the impact of the last state election.
How so?
Well, normally when we have a state election result, we get very polarised business views on what that will mean for the economy. And this time round it was no different, in that there's very strong expectation that the economy over the next 12 months is not going to be what it should be. Normally after about 3 to 6 months you start to see those business views even themselves out. They come to the realisation that a change in the helm of government doesn't necessitate a change in economic conditions. Interestingly, when Anna Blow was re-elected in 2009, Campbell Newman was elected in 2012, Tony Abbott elected in 2013, there were very sharp spikes in business confidence. People felt that the economy was going to improve as a result of those election results. However, this time round, with the election result from this year, there hasn't been that uplift in business confidence, and contrary, there's actually now an expectation that the Queensland economy is going to soften over the next 12 months.
Do you think the fact that we have a hung parliament plays into that result at all?
Our view is that the impact that minority government has on economic performance is overstated. Businesses initially have the view that with minority government you lose confidence because you lack certainty. But we've actually analysed the economic growth rates of majority governments versus minority governments across Australia. Interestingly, each state has had at least 4 years of minority government across the 2 decades. And what we found is that minority government economic growth rates actually trump majority government growth rates, which is quite surprising. But what that really means is there's bigger influences, there's bigger levers on economic activity than who happens to be at the helm of the state government. Things such as monetary policy, the exchange rate, commodity prices, and even the weather itself are all major influences on the economy. The state government, it has an important role to play, particularly in the formation of the state budget, but really there are bigger things that influence job creation and economic growth.
So it's not how governments get power, but what they do with it, and lately Labor has knocked on the head quite a number of big developments. Can you list a few examples of decisions that have affected business confidence since Anastasia Palaszczuk became Premier?
Interestingly, from what we've heard from our members, their disquiet appears more to be with the process of a new government than the government itself. It is only natural that a new government wants to determine the appropriateness of major projects for themselves to see if they're the right fit for the state. And that's what we're seeing. This government is in a review stage, and so we're actually urging the state government to smash through that review stage, because last week was a bad week for the government. We saw that there were a number of major decisions that coincided together, which has caused business some disquiet. Things such as walking away from cruise ship infrastructure for the Broadwater, calling in of the Cedar Woods development. That should be a process that is determined by local government. Delaying electricity price deregulation in South East Queensland, calling into question 1 William Street. These are all things that does not fit comfortably with Queensland business. At a time when At a time when Queensland has 162,000 workers out of a job, we have an unemployment rate at 6.5%, well above the national average. The more that we can do to get these sorts of projects over the line, the more inroads we can make into this challenge. And so we urge wherever there is opportunity to progress and pass a project within our economy, we do so, because the last thing we want to do is undermine any potential that we have for jobs creation, because each of these major projects, it cascades economic benefit down to the surrounding business community. The 403,000 Queensland small businesses, they benefit from these projects. So it's not just the project proponents that win from these projects, it's all the communities.
What effect, if any, has the Billy Gordon scandal had on business confidence?
Many of our members and the Queensland business community more broadly will have strong views on the appropriateness of Billy Gordon to be a member of the Queensland Legislative Assembly. However, the Chamber does not have a view, but what we are focused on is what the impact of this affair has on the numbers within Parliament for the government to pass the legislation, coupled together with the concerns that it has in terms of crowding out those important issues that need to be discussed. The last thing we want is for community scrutiny, media scrutiny, to be focused on Billy Gordon and whether or not Queensland Labor has the numbers in the House at the expense of what really needs to occur to create jobs, because the Premier is right, it is all about jobs, and the more time we focus on these sorts of scandalous issues, the less opportunity there is to bring the community on the journey of why difficult decisions have to be made, but it is in the best interests in the longer term.
All right, Nick, that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything you wanted to add at all?
Only in that Queensland Labor has gone out of its way to create a good working, productive relationship with the business community, and we believe that Queensland Labor should be afforded opportunity to govern. Ultimately, however, Queensland business, particularly small business, will form their views around the effectiveness of this government in the May, June and July parliamentary sittings. The real test for this government will be in the state budget. This is the foremost instrument of economic and fiscal planning within our state, and they really want to see a state budget that delivers economic growth but continues on that pathway of delivering fiscal restraint.
I'd like to just one final question quickly on the possibility of a voting bloc with Billy Gordon and the KAP MPs on behalf of their North Queensland electorates. What will that mean for the passage of legislation and business confidence more broadly?
Unfortunately, voting blocs are one of the downsides of minority government. What we are fearful of is that the voice of a minority within the Queensland Legislative Assembly end up with the power to determine the future of our state. We believe that the strategic direction of our Parliament should be one that delivers jobs and economic growth for all of Queensland, not just a particular region. So we would urge all members of the Legislative Assembly to look at the big picture, to look at the state as a whole and make decisions for all of Queenslanders, not just the members within their electorate, because it will be short-sighted and it will be at the expense of economic growth and jobs for all of Queensland.
Terrific. All right, we'll just stay seated while Cole...
One of the other issues that the Queensland business community is conscious of is not just the projects and whether or not they will proceed, it's actually the policies of Queensland Labor itself. From our viewpoint, there were two sets of promises made in the last state election, one to the people of Queensland and another set of promises to the Queensland Union movement. And at this point, there is a perception that the immediate policy agenda of this state government is to reward the Queensland Union movement. Issues such as winding back of workers' comp reforms that delivered $250 million benefit to the Queensland business community, reduced premiums by 17%, created significant growth, that will now be reversed. Additionally, unions will now have unfettered access to work sites as well. So there appears to be a number of policy positions with this state government which is at odds with the Premier's commitment to create jobs and to unite Queensland. So we would urge the state government to be cautious in its approach of rewarding the unions and to again be true to that spirit of governing for all of Queensland, including the Queensland small business community.